Anyway, we're going to move on. Keep your views coming in, because the Department for Work and Pensions is apparently spending a whopping £8 million a year on translators for non-English speakers. That's an average of £250 per call.
Now, over the past 3 years, the DWP has offered translation services for almost 90 different languages, many of which are only spoken in remote communities.
Seriously? OK, well, former Health Minister Neil O'Brien, who obtained the information through parliamentary questions, said it raises the issue of why the UK was providing benefits to people who could not speak English in the first place. Yes, that was my first thought, I must admit.
Well, joining us now is the head of campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance, Elliot Keck, friend of the show. Elliot, this is quite extraordinary. I presume a significant degree of this will be towards refugees.
Yeah, listen, absolutely. People who come here on an asylum basis, and particularly from countries where, you take a look at Ukraine, for example, there will be Ukrainian refugees that probably have very limited English-speaking capabilities. But the expectation should be that anybody that claims benefits speaks English, and if they don't speak English, they should learn to speak English very, very rapidly. It's simply unsustainable for us as a country to provide public services in general, but in particular benefits to those who can't speak English.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at some of the detail here, that a lot of calls were in a language spoken in Pakistan and India.
Yeah, Mirpuri.
Unlikely to be asylum seekers, necessarily.
Yeah, and listen, we spend hundreds of millions of pounds on interpretation and translation services across a range of public services. Some of them are very legitimate. So let's take, if you're a witness in court and you don't have much English, but you're an important witness, obviously you need access to interpreters. I think even if you're a suspect, you are entitled to a fair trial, and if you don't have good English speaking abilities, that should be provided to you by the courts. But benefits are a very different system. They're called benefits, right? They are a privilege. They are not something you are necessarily automatically entitled to. They're something that you get, normally because you're a citizen of the country and you genuinely are unable to work. But if you're someone that has, not able to speak English, you have not even done the bare minimum of integration. And I think we need to really look at whether or not translation services for benefit claimants are appropriate.
Romanian is the second, comes second. 11,706 calls.
Completely inappropriate, yeah.
Surely.
There are, in this country, ghettoised communities.
Absolutely.
There are sort of sections of places in this country where people go about their daily lives never having to encounter the English language, speaking only within one community. I mean, that's the very opposite of integration.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we used to expect people to learn English, and that was only the bare minimum. Of course, many people can speak English and yet are still poor examples of integration. Most of the people involved in the grooming gangs, I have no doubt, spoke English. So speaking English is absolutely not enough to be an integrated individual in this country, but it is certainly the bare minimum. And the £8 million on interpretation services suggests that many people aren't even doing the bare minimum. You look at a place like where we're sat now, 72% of people in social housing were born outside the UK. Around half are economically inactive. It's completely unsustainable for us as a country.
72%.
In the council that we're in at the moment.
The specific area, so Paddington, in Westminster more broadly, it's about 60%.
So that's more than half. More than half of all social housing is going to people not born in the country.
According to migrationfacts.com, who did analysis of the ONS census data. It's completely unsustainable.
It is crazy.
Yeah.
It is crazy. Meanwhile, British people born and bred here are moving out of London because they can't afford to live here. It is crazy. Rupert Lowe, the Reform MP, has said evidently we're allowing too many low-skilled migrants into our country who are incapable of supporting themselves. I mean, that's not exactly a stretch, is it? If we're looking at all these people who are signing on to benefits, who can't even speak English, that would suggest that they're not high-skilled migrants.
That's absolutely right. The Centre for Policy Studies looked at the particularly recent, they call it the Boris wave, those who arrived under the Boris Johnson immigration system. And they estimate that those individuals, if they get indefinite leave to remain, which they will be granted in a few years' time, they could end up costing taxpayers about £230 billion over the course of their lifetime. Kemi Badenoch says this country can't be a hotel. Well, in a hotel, you at least have to pay.
I suppose one of the arguments here, though, for this number we're looking at, for those that have come over legally as economic migrants, there are a lot of restrictions on accessing services and benefits. They can't get social housing. For the first 5 years, they can't get social housing. They have to pay an NHS surcharge. They can't claim job seekers. But after 5 years, those sort of protections for the taxpayer fall away?
Essentially, yes. I think it's 10 years in order to gain access to the NHS, to the state pension. But I think we need to look at, if we're not going to change the rules on indefinite leave to remain in terms of, being allowed to remain in the country, we do need to look at some of those benefits and think about extending them to maybe 10, 15 or even 20 years.
Also, it's just so important for the social contract, as it were, for people who are paying into the system, have been here all their lives.
That's right.
Generations have paid into the system, and then to see, it going to people who can't even speak the language, I mean, it's a bit of a kick in the teeth. But Elliot Keck, thank you very much indeed for explaining that all to us, Head of Campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance, always looking after taxpayer money.
Absolutely.